So we're going to continue with the agenda and this second day of our sessions in this international seminar on subjective well-being. Yesterday, we heard many presentations about statistics, national statistics, the use in public policies, and today we have a table from a different standpoint. This is a different perspective that is related to the potential uses in other spaces, microspaces. Particularly, we'll have several presentations about potential uses within companies. I'm going to introduce the first panelist. I'll introduce each one of them. His name is Herberto Rodriguez Regordosa. He has a degree in industrial engineering and a master's degree in finance by the University of the Americas, Puebla. He studied the program for high management. He has a master's degree in economics from the University of Barcelona and will soon have a PhD. He took part in the Diploma of Social Leadership, Coparmex, and in courses of social education from USEM. He's a lecturer, panelist of National Assemblies of Coparmex and several business and university congresses. He worked as general manager of Tubos de Cemento de Alta Resistencia and Tubos Ecológicos de Concreto and was CEO of IESE. He participated as director of Canacintra. It's a business organization, also as chairman of the Young Businessmen Commission of Coparmex, another business organization in Puebla, and he's the National VP of Young Businessmen. He was National VP of Coparmex and Vice Chancellor of the University of Puebla. At present, he's Vice Chancellor of Postgraduate Studies during 2011 and 2014. So you have 20 minutes. Okay, I thank Flaxo and INEGI for this invitation to share experiences of our practice, particularly these last 9 years. I have worked as the director of an academic institution. I knew about happiness because we have Mariano Rojas, part-time in Puebla, and we have been studying this a lot. The name of my conference is Teaching for Work or Learning for Life. My research field for my PhD is economics of education, so I'll try to make a synthesis of these topics. Well, I have the control here. This is the agenda. I'm proposing to talk about the situation of university education worldwide, the paradigm of economics of education, what's an educational model, and its relationship with subjective well-being and some conclusions, but you will have the most important part. In fact, what's going on is that higher education worldwide is under pressure. Higher education has its backgrounds in the University of the Middle Age, related to the churches and certain elitism, because only members of the church and aristocracy attended, and it was not open to anyone else. Then, during Napoleon and Baron von Humboldt, the universities became more scientific. Napoleon saw it as a place where people should get ready for public service, and there were interests of the state to foster universities. And then with contributions by economists by Schultz or Gary Becker, they proposed this theory of human capital, where the approach is that higher education contributes a lot to economic growth and should be a state interest, and therefore should have resources from the public or public resources. Therefore, there's a spectacular growth in higher education worldwide. In the most developed countries, the participation rate exceeds 50% of the young people And in countries like Mexico, we have grown consistently, and now 1 out of 3 youngsters go to universities. And plus the demographic bonus in Mexico, there's a great pressure on the public system. And this has been solved with private education. That today is 1/3 of the enrollment in our country. It has generated a following best practices. All of them have received certification. There's an absence of differentiation between institutions. This is a problem, and the universities are under constant pressure of offering more quantity and quality in the services offered, and therefore we face a constant increase in the costs as a consequence of a production system that is intensive in qualified personnel. 2/3 of our revenues are for payroll, and the rest is distributed as best as possible. So I think the online systems can help a little bit with a technological change to improve this efficiency. Other topics is the welfare state crisis. There's pressure to spend in other sectors and not in higher education. There's a strong pressure to invest only money in education, initial education, and not in the following levels. And there's a broader role with education in society, of higher education in society, it has become something to give back to society. So there's a debate around the use of public funds. And I think that the tendency is that there's a need to increase private funding, but I believe that you can leave the market alone. At the end, a hybrid system between private and public education that gives opportunity could be interesting. There's a phenomenon from a book I've just read. It's called academic capitalism. This is a phenomenon seen in American universities and some Anglo-Saxon universities where, in fact, teachers are extraordinary academic capitalists. I've met Michael Porter, and it's impressive how they manage the brand, how much he charges per conference. So this is a phenomenon, and he can hardly have the time to be with a student. What are the objectives of higher education? We'll know teaching this capacity of teaching and train the students. There are basically two models. The meritocratic one, to provide excellency that closes the doors of the university and only opens it for those with more skills. The TOEFL, the GMAT, the GRE. So they only receive this kind of people, and the enrollment becomes something economic. And this is different to other egalitarian models when you provide opportunity. UNAM is a good example of a university that looks for a more equalitarian society and gives opportunity to anyone who wants to study. Then we have research to create and diffuse knowledge. So this is to improve productivity, and with the social sciences, it's the operation of the institutions. And another one, very in fashion, is the outreach that is related to the service for society. Those of us who studied economics of education, for us, this is the predominant paradigm. Education should be efficient. Therefore, we make analysis of inputs and outputs. We have students, teachers, staff, resources on one hand, like a black box where we have teaching, learning, and all these processes. And at the end, what are we looking for? That the universities generate outputs, that is graduates. We hope high-quality graduates, research, technology transference, and patents and services for society. If we take this to to the graduate level, what do you have? You have a student, there's a process more in terms of teaching than learning, so they have to acquire competencies. I remember when I went to the Boy Scouts and you generate a certain knowledge and skills, you obtain a badge. And this is a system for competencies to acquire badges so that you may graduate from universities with all your skills. Of course, there are techniques to use Excel very well and specific ones regarding engineering, structural calculation, but there are some called behavioral, which I will cover later on. But at the end, we are generating a product that makes a match or a perfect correlation with what the industry and businesses want. And therefore, we have a competent graduate for work. Well, I think that here we have some issues in the personal decision from the standpoint of the one who takes the decision regarding higher education. It's time and money I have to invest. It should have an economic logic. It should be rational, and it should maximize our resources. And we have certain likes, preferences, and vocational guidance exercises to detect my talents and opportunities. And you always have to run away from maths, all of us who have children who want to study, and this is very bad in Mexico. So I take this from the work or labor observatory. This is the monthly wage of a graduate of philosophy and finance and aeronautic engineering. So if Aristotle, either Musk, were born in Mexico, they couldn't have made the decision to study philosophy, and maybe they could be aeronautic engineers. So this is the issue we are facing when we talk about economics of education, that we give a lot of importance to this economic and financial situation, and you leave aside the human part. So what's going on with the results? I'm going to share 2 or 3. We conducted a survey. The University of Valencia has a very standardized system called Proflex. To date, there are several universities that have conducted this survey. These are graduates after working for 3 years. 76% had a work, 10% more than one work. That means they are underemployed, and 14% are unemployed. In 3 years, they had on average 3 employments, so they have switched a lot. They earn more than 12,000 pesos on average. In the table, we compared an UPAEP graduate, and assuming that the average is one university, I calculated this number. A graduate of UPAEP earns 566 pesos more. This is like 68,000 pesos when the degree costs more than 300,000 pesos. So there's no logic. So in order to reach this present value to pay for the degree, his wage would have to grow 8% perpetually to pay for his degree. So this looks very difficult. The study has several subjects, and the satisfaction with the degree, in fact, only 1 out of 3 is very satisfied with their degree. They studied, and it's useful for their work. In the case of UPAEP graduates, it's higher. So to what extent has your degree been a good base for improving your perspective 1 out of 3, even though the others, it's almost 1 out of 2. Some other numbers, I'll go quickly over this, and this called my attention because this last question, if you could go back and were free to choose a degree, so see how around 40% would choose another degree. This talks about a certain frustration that we're having in these logics of capitalism or economics of higher education. In general, you're satisfied with your current work. Most are not. Both students from all universities and our students. And when we ask, this is a fun question for psychologists regarding the competencies you should have, which one do you use? Well, it turns out there are many that are not being used and they don't understand them. So this is a great problem that we are having. Well, I'm going to skip this. This is personal satisfactions in work, in autonomy, work stability, the opportunity to learn new things, your income, face new challenges. This is related to the literature of happiness in the regard of how I feel with work satisfaction. I want to highlight, to continue with this chapter, is that in general the graduates of UPAEP report higher scores in the selection of values and guidance. And I want to link this to the educational model that we are applying. So what do we think in UPAEP? And give me the benefit of the doubt. This is helping the scores of the satisfaction of my graduates. This is a humanist educational model focused on the person. The student is responsible and they have a unique and untransferable vocation. We are coherent between thinking, doing, and saying. We are trying to develop individual qualities. For instance, we were the first university in Mexico that systematically used the trench quest of Gallup of positive psychology as a self-knowledge mechanism to use it as a tool to orient talents. And therefore, the students may experience better learning. We think that society is natural and necessary. There's a cultivation and maturation of human capabilities, and we defend truth and culture. We are not very technocratic, but rounder in all regards. This starts from an institutional philosophy that we apply from top to bottom, that is, to the classroom. We have an education by competencies, but also related to human competencies, sports, social outreach. It's quite flexible. Many things we have applied that are going on in the classroom and we hope might give the student much more elements. So what do I do with this literature of subjective well-being? Well, since it's focused on people, our process is not in terms of learning. It's a subjective curriculum because the student will decide what he wants and how he learns and the decisions he makes. And this is a great foundation to support in the literature of subjective well-being. It's interdisciplinary and flexible because each student builds his own curriculum, their relationship with teachers, tutors, students, and community. It's very important. No one can give what you don't have when you have teachers who are connected and close. Students really capture it. There are great activities or extracurricular activities, but they form part of the curriculum. This is called the hidden curriculum. So we want the curriculum to be more explicit and in the Cardex, even though it doesn't count for the Ministry of Education. We have all the activities that the students perform within the university. So oftentimes we've seen that they are hired because they were in the group of theater and they have communication skills and not because of their grades. And something else we've started studying is related to moral competencies or human competencies, like citizenship, sympathy, empathy, courtesy, gratitude, self-awareness, self-control, honesty, humbleness. And this is the challenge. I'm going to finish. And the next step is that we need to cross the life domains of the literature of subjective well-being with an educational model. That is, there's great literature in the regard that people who have stable families study a good degree and they end up with good families, and people with a relationship in the university are happier, and students who smoke pot are not happier, if you were wondering. So there's a lot of literature, but it's not enough, I think, to understand the dynamics of higher education. Some conclusions: I think that the dominant paradigm is in crisis. This perspective to educate educate for work and for income, it's not valid anymore. I think subjective well-being can be very useful to build a new one, that is to educate for happiness and for a life full of meaning. And all the educational models can use this literature to enrich it and be more human. And finally, and this is, I want to summon all of you, there's a lot of need to make research about education and its relationship with happiness. Thank you very much. I thank you for your presentation, and particularly to listen to it not when I was a teenager, because I have a degree in philosophy. It's not because I don't want to study maths, but I have a PhD in demographics. So I'm very glad I just heard it now. Our next participant is Margarita Tarragona Saez. She has a PhD in psychology from the University of Chicago, and she is teacher in Universidad Iberoamericana. She forms part of the board of directors of the International Association of Positive Psychology. She's coordinator of the diploma in positive psychology in Universidad Iberoamericana. She's founder and teacher of the Grupo Campos Elíseos Centro de Entrenamiento en Psicoterapia y Psicología Positiva. She's an author of several publications and lecturer. She will talk about subjective well-being and individual flourishing. Good morning. Yeah. Well, I have a master's degree in mechanical and electric engineering. No, I'm very bad for this. I would like to thank you, really, Gerardo, Inegi, Flaxo, for the opportunity of being here. I'm very honored to be with so extraordinary lecturers, and I really thank you for being here. I would like to give you in 15 minutes a tour, a kind of flight around positive psychology and what it can contribute for decision-making to promote well-being. What's positive psychology? Going back, I think we've been listening a lot about the interests of economists and experts in politics to promote well-being. And positive psychology, it's very interested in studying what does work in people, what's the best about life, what helps people to live fully, what are the sources of psychological health. Christopher Peterson, may he rest in peace, one of the pioneers of positive psychology, in a not very humble manner, said that the objective of positive psychology is to study what makes life worth living it. It's not only related to psychology, philosophy, and other disciplines have a lot to say, but what I want to say is this idea that within psychology, even it could seem a lie, it's not very common to study what works. Here we have a picture of the DSM, that is the manual, the statistical manual of mental disorder. In this previous version had more than 250 categories of mental disorders. And it's the 5th edition is about to be launched that will contain even more. And more aspects of human experience are classified as pathological.
There was some disarray because people thought that this new manual of mental disorders considered that 50% of the American population would at some point be diagnosed of a mental disorder. Okay, how many of you are psychologists here? Okay, culture of psychologists focuses on what's wrong, what's not working. So positive psychology does not propose throwing away more than 1 century of knowledge and practices and research, but to have a profession and academia that's much more balanced, that pays attention to what's good, to what helps you live life fully, and to human pain as well. James Ron Pawelski, a dear colleague of mine, was saying recently, well, he was speaking from the metaphysical standpoint. I don't know anything about metaphysics, but one of the idea in positive psychology is that what's good is as real or as desirable as what's bad. Okay, I'm going to skip this, but as some colleagues were mentioning, initially when they tried to measure this, their colleagues were laughing at them or making fun. Same thing happens with psychology. So I always say, okay, look, this is real. Look who's doing this. So we have Martin Seligman, who's the father of positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi from the University of Chicago, Edward Diener, who's here, George Valiant from Harvard, Christopher Pearson. So some people in very serious university are taking happiness very importantly. And some people say, oh, this is a Yankee thing. But no, this doesn't only matter for Americans. There's people studying this in Europe, in Latin America, and in Mexico. We have more and more psychologists studying this. I apologize. This is not an exhaustive list. It's only the people I know, the people with whom I have contact. Dr. Joaquina Palomar, a group from the UNAM, Rocio Hernandez Pozo, Alejandra Tapia. Well, some very capable and serious people are studying this. And also great psychologists have presented in these past couple of days. Okay, so an interesting semantic thing is, okay, what do we speak when are we speaking of flourishing, of happiness, of, so many have spoken of happiness. Happiness sometimes carries the risk of people identifying this with a smiley face. So the first time we were promoting our diploma in positive psychologist, the people from the university, the first drawing they made for the poster was a clown, and I didn't really like it because I think it gives this idea of cheery smiles, and the issue of happiness, it definitely includes smiling, but it goes beyond this. Dr. Seligman proposed that instead of speaking of happiness, we should speak of well-being, which is more complex, more complete. But in Spain, they were telling me that that in Spain, well-being relates it to the welfare state, but in Mexico it doesn't really happen. But sometimes they're interchangeable. And flourishing has to do with being fulfilled and having a good state health. And people who are in a very good condition, they don't only feel good, but they also involve themselves in sharing or trying to improve the world they live in. Some of the subjects studied by positive psychology, I think, are very passionate. Well, I would have loved studying this during school. Well, happiness, positive emotions, gratitude, optimism, resilience, moral qualities or capacities. I think these are all very enticing subjects. Well, Mr. Halley was who already left. Well, how many of you would have liked studying any of these subjects in school? Okay, well, I'm not going to discuss the issue of what happiness is. It's a subject which, I think what positive psychology is providing is just a grain of sand. It's not a new conception of important concepts of life. For many years before us, the great philosophers and spiritual traditions and other disciplines have done things to ensure that we know what makes life worth living. But what makes positive psychology different is that it's using science to study issues that were not very studied in the past. In positive psychology, we use classic tools such as observation, in-depth interviewing, etc. So we use methods we already have in science and psychology for understanding happiness. Well, if we had more time, I'd tell you to speak to the person next to you and give them in 30 seconds your definition of freedom. Aristotle spoke of this how long ago? 2,500 years ago. And I was going to ask you to discuss this in 2 minutes, but we'll skip this. Okay. Happiness in psychology has used many definitions which are not complete, but this is quite good. It's Lubomirsky, Sonia Lubomirsky's definition. It says happiness is a combination of feeling pleasure, of enjoyment, of being fulfilled. It's evaluative, cognitive, and behavioral as well, and a sensation that life is worth living. And so studies on happiness usually comprise one or several of these dimensions. Dr. Seligman makes a very interesting analysis. When we ask somebody what climate is, they say, well, is it humidity? Well, that's a part. Is it wind? Well, that's a part. Is it atmospheric pressure? But no, it's not, none of these in isolation. It's everything put together. So we have to think of happiness as a series of elements that coexist psychologically. So I want to share a memory or heuristic technique for synthesizing what we know about the most important elements for individual happiness. Well, Seligman has a model that synthesizes in PERMA, and which I translated into Spanish as PRISMA, which are the same elements but in a different order. Okay, so what does the PERMA-PRISMA include? Well, positive thinking. Okay, I'm going to mention them first, and then I'm going to describe each of them. Okay, so positive thinking, positive relations, involvement in your life, activities, having a meaningful life, and also to reach goals. Okay. So this synthesizes some of the most important factors that contribute to human happiness. So let's begin with being positive. Okay, so this basically refers to feeling emotions we enjoy, and it includes something cognitive in the sense that we have a positive framework for the future. The most important researcher on this is Barbara Fredrickson. So during many years, if you go to a psychology library and you look for books about anger, rage, or sadness, well, you'll find a bunch of stuff, and there's a consensus that anxiety or wrath have an important evolutionary importance because it helps you escape from risks. But we thought, okay, well, we have positive emotions, but we don't know what they're for. Dr. Fredrickson, who has discovered that positive emotions that people recognize most easily are these which you have on the slide, has said that positive emotions do have a purpose. When she conducts studies and experience where they bring people to positive emotions, they it increases their attention, their memory, their eloquence, and their openness to new information. And this has led to a theory of expanding and building. So feeling pleasure allows us to open to the world, to explore, and to build. As Dr. Diener mentioned yesterday, we've seen that positive thinking predicts whether we're going to have better interpersonal relations, success, health in terms of susceptibility to infections and inflammatory things. Well, there's strong evidence that it correlates to longevity. Something important found by Dr. Fredrickson is that there's a rate of positive emotions that characterize the people who are happy, and it's 3-to-1 thing. So it's not that we've never experimented rage or desperation or anything, but for each of these negative emotions, there's 3 positive ones. This goes against intuition, because I would think that a depressed person would have much more negative emotion than positive ones. You know what the ratio is for depressed people? It's 1-to-1. Which leads us to a point where it seems that positive emotions are two completely separate dimensions and not a continuum. Okay, PERMA. Now we have relations. Okay, a Brazilian colleague told me a Brazilian saying, which is wonderful. It says, if you want to kill the spider, you have to unknit its web. And that's true for human beings as well. If we get rid of our social network, then what's left of us? Okay, if we don't have, well, there's studies that show that not having a network of relations can be as risky for your health as smoking or obesity. And there's a relation between this and a bad immune system. For instance, if your significant other dies, then that's one of the most traumatic events you can have. John Gottman has discovered that good relations have a 5-to-1 ratio of positive relations. Well, Christopher Peterson, who recently died, said positive psychology reduces to the following words: other people matter. And having good relations with other people leads to happiness. What's the panic button? Sorry. Okay, involvement refers to having flow. Has it ever happened to you that you're so involved in something that you lose track of time? You're focused on this. That's called flow. Who's done it, who's studied it most is Dr. Michakis and Mikhail. When we do things that involve a medium-high challenge for which we have a medium-high ability. This ability contributes to our well-being. I'm not going to speak of every single combination, but why is it is this important? Well, because Csikszentmihalyi and other researchers show that the more flow we have, the more happy we are. If we can involve us and focus and be very present, this increases our happiness. Meaning of life. Related to what Dr. Hollywood was mentioning, well, they say it shows that people who are volunteers or involve themselves with other people have a lower death rate than people who identify as religious. Well, they also have higher happiness levels. So that's the importance of feeling part of something larger, feeling connected to something that transcends us. Okay, finally, having goals. This word ikigai, it comes from Japanese, and a study by Jan Butner from places where they have most people over 100 years old, includes Okinawa. Many of these, and in interviews, they said ikigai, having a reason to wake up in the morning. This has to do with having a purpose. And it shows that when people establish goals, then our possibilities of success increases, and it gives more meaning to our life. The best goals are intrinsical ones, the ones that we do because they're important for us. They're specific and measurable. So we'll just leave this here. I'd like to mention, okay, how can we increase our happiness? I like what Dr. Rojas said yesterday, and I think Dr. Yamamoto, that even though we have information from academia or experts on what happiness is and how we can increase this, I think our customer is most important. We should ask people what increases their happiness. Sources of wisdom. I mean, if you ask your grandma, she says, okay, if you ask her, what can I do to be more happy? She's not going to say, oh, I've never read any books about the subject, so I can't help you. But we can definitely find information from people. But this whole corpus of research can give us many ideas. And recently, we've tried positive interventions, activities that increase happiness in people. Okay, I'm running out of time, right? I'll tell you, if we think of these 5 areas to increase positive thinking, one of the things we can do is increase gratitude, a gratitude diary, help other people to be kind and compassionate, to meditate. There's a huge evidence of how meditating increases our positive emotions, physical exercise, for good relations. There's many things we can do and to increase our involvement, to choose skills that can help us focus on this, to establish goals that are important for us, observable or measurable. There's things we can make decisions on in our everyday life for this. Thank you.